In a vibrant city of Accra, Ghana, there lived a woman named Grace Mensah, a talented graphic designer with dreams as bright as the West African sun. She had recently married Michael, a charismatic marketing executive who swept her off her feet with grand romantic gestures and promises of forever. Their wedding was the talk of their community, with friends and family celebrating what appeared to be a perfect union. But behind closed doors, a different story was unfolding. Michael was not the man he pretended to be. Throughout their courtship and even after their vows, he maintained relationships with multiple women. His phone buzzed constantly with messages he would hide, and his business meetings often lasted until the early morning hours. Grace, with her kind heart and unwavering faith, believed that marriage would transform him. She convinced herself that her love, patience, and prayers would be enough to change his ways. Michael possessed a dangerous combination of charm and manipulation. He could look Grace directly in the eyes and profess his devotion while simultaneously planning his next rendezvous. When Grace questioned his late nights or the unfamiliar perfume on his shirts, he would shower her with gifts and affection, making her doubt her own instincts. "You're overthinking things, my love," he would say with a disarming smile. "Don't you trust me?" The truth was that Michael projected his own infidelity onto Grace. Because he was unfaithful, he assumed everyone else operated the same way. This twisted logic allowed him to justify his behavior while simultaneously suspecting Grace of the very sins he committed daily. He thrived on the attention from multiple women, enjoying the power it gave him and the thrill of living a double life. Grace's world began to crack one humid evening when her colleague Sarah sent her a message that changed everything. Sarah worked in the same office complex as Michael and had seen something she couldn't ignore. "Grace, I'm so sorry to tell you this, but Michael isn't working late. I just saw him at the Golden Palm restaurant with another woman. They were very close." Grace's hands trembled as she read the words. Her heart pounded in her chest as she grabbed her purse and rushed to the restaurant. When she arrived, the scene before her confirmed her worst fears. There sat Michael, laughing heartily, his arm draped around an elegantly dressed woman who fed him dessert with intimate familiarity. Grace stood frozen at the entrance, tears streaming down her face, before gathering the courage to approach their table. "Michael," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. The color drained from Michael's face as his companion looked up in confusion. Instead of apologizing or showing remorse, Michael's expression hardened. "What are you doing here?" he demanded, his tone sharp and accusatory. "You said you were working late," Grace replied, her voice shaking with emotion and disbelief. Michael stood abruptly, grabbing Grace's arm roughly and pulling her outside. "Don't you ever embarrass me like that again," he hissed. "This is exactly why I can't stand your insecure behavior." That night, Grace cried herself to sleep while Michael stayed out until dawn, not bothering to offer any real explanation. By morning, Michael returned with flowers and rehearsed apologies. "She's just a client, Grace. You're overreacting. You know you're my wife, right? I love you." Grace desperately wanted to believe him. She had invested so much in their marriage, and the thought of failure terrified her. She accepted his explanation, pushing down her intuition and choosing to trust him once more. But deep inside, a small voice whispered that this was only the beginning of her heartbreak. If you're enjoying this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell so you never miss our powerful tales of love, betrayal, and redemption. Share your thoughts in the comments below. 3 months after the restaurant incident, Grace discovered she was pregnant. The news filled her with both joy and apprehension. She hoped that becoming a father would finally anchor Michael to their family, that the reality of a child would make him appreciate what he had. But when she shared the news with him one morning over breakfast, his reaction shocked her to the core. "Pregnant?" After one time, Michael said skeptically, his eyes narrowing with suspicion. "How convenient." Grace felt as though she'd been slapped. "Michael, what are you saying? You're my husband. I've never been with anyone else." He scoffed, pushing away from the table. "That's what they all say." "I'm not stupid, Grace. You expect me to believe you got pregnant from one encounter?" I know how women operate." The irony was devastating. While Grace had been faithfully devoted to their marriage, Michael had been sleeping with multiple women throughout their relationship. Yet his own guilty conscience made him project his infidelity onto her. He began treating her with open contempt, staying out late deliberately, and returning home reeking of other women's perfume. When Grace tried to discuss their problems, he would shut her down with cruel accusations. As Grace's pregnancy progressed, Michael became increasingly distant and hostile. He refused to attend prenatal appointments, claiming he was too busy with work. When Grace asked him to accompany her just once, he erupted. "Why should I waste my time playing happy family for a child that probably isn't even mine? You must think I'm a fool." Grace's heart shattered into a million pieces. She stopped asking for his support and began attending appointments alone, watching other expectant mothers with their loving partners, wondering what she had done to deserve such treatment. The months passed in lonely misery. Grace continued cooking, cleaning, and caring for their home, even as Michael treated her like a stranger. He would come and go as he pleased, never explaining his whereabouts, never showing interest in the baby growing inside her. Grace prayed constantly, begging God to soften Michael's heart, to help him see reason, to restore their marriage. But her prayers seemed to echo in an empty void. When Grace finally went into labor, it was a difficult delivery that required a cesarean section. She sent word to Michael, desperately hoping he would come and meet their child. But hours passed, then days, and Michael never appeared. Grace lay in her hospital bed, holding their newborn son Emmanuel, surrounded by the joyful celebrations of other new families, while she faced the painful reality that she was utterly alone. A compassionate nurse named Alma became Grace's only support during those difficult days. Alma would visit her after shifts, helping with the baby and offering words of encouragement. "You're stronger than you know," Alma would say. "God sees your tears, and he won't let them be in vain." Those words became Grace's lifeline as she faced the terrifying uncertainty of her future. When she was finally discharged from the hospital, Grace returned to an empty house with no idea what awaited her. Grace arrived home exhausted, carrying baby Emmanuel and a small bag of hospital supplies. The house was eerily quiet. She called out for Michael, but there was no response. Just as she was settling Emmanuel in his crib, she heard the front door slam. Michael stormed in, his face twisted with rage, holding a brown envelope in his hand. "So you thought you could fool me?" he shouted, throwing the envelope on the table. Grace's hands trembled as she picked it up, pulling out documents that made her blood run cold. It was a DNA test result. "You did a test on our baby? Without even telling me?" she whispered in disbelief. "Oh, I told him," Michael sneered. "I took a sample when you were sleeping in the hospital. And guess what? That child isn't mine." The room spun around Grace. "That's impossible. Michael, Emmanuel is your son. I swear before God, I have never been with another man." But Michael wasn't listening. He grabbed her arm roughly, dragging her toward the door. "Get out of my house, you lying prostitute. Take your bastard child and leave." Despite having just undergone major surgery, despite holding a newborn baby, Grace was thrown out into the night like garbage. With nowhere to go and no money, Grace wandered the streets of Accra in shock. She knocked on doors of people she thought were friends, but fear and judgment closed those doors in her face. She tried calling relatives, but no one would take her in. As night fell, Grace found herself under the Kwame Nkrumah Circle overpass, wrapping Emmanuel in her shawl as best she could, trying to shield him from the cold and the reality of their situation. She spent 3 days on the streets, begging for food and help. The looks of pity and disgust from passers-by cut deeper than hunger. She tried going to her uncle's house, the home that had belonged to her late father before her uncle seized it, claiming a woman had no right to inherit property. She knocked on the door, baby in arms, hoping that family blood would mean something. But her uncle looked at her with cold eyes and threatened her never to return. Desperate and broken, Grace made her way to Michael's mother's house. Surely, as a grandmother, the woman would show mercy to her grandson. But when Michael's mother opened the door and saw Grace with the baby, her face contorted with anger. "So you dare bring your shame here? You think I'll help you raise another man's child under my roof? God forbid. Michael's sister joined in, hurling insults and accusations, calling Grace terrible names before slamming the door in her face. That night, back under the overpass, Grace held Emmanuel close and wept. She was at her lowest point, with no options left and no strength remaining. She looked at her innocent baby and whispered, "I don't know how we'll survive, but I promise you, my son, I will never abandon you. I will be everything you need, no matter what it takes." Through her tears, she prayed for a miracle, for any sign that God had not forgotten them in their darkest hour. The morning sun rose over Accra, and Grace knew she had to find food for herself so she could continue nursing Emmanuel. She walked through the busy streets, feeling invisible among the rushing crowds. That's when she saw him, a well-dressed man in an expensive suit, completely absorbed in his phone conversation as he stepped into the street without looking. Grace saw the approaching taxi speeding toward him and didn't think twice. "Watch out!" she screamed, lunging forward and grabbing his arm just as the vehicle whizzed past, missing him by inches. The man stumbled backward, his phone clattering to the ground, his heart racing as he realized what had just happened. He turned to see a young woman with a baby strapped to her back, breathing heavily and looking exhausted. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice filled with genuine concern. Grace nodded weakly. "I should be asking you that. You nearly—" She couldn't finish the sentence. The man, who introduced himself as Kwame Owusu, a successful real estate developer, insisted on thanking her properly. He noticed her worn clothes, the way she held herself with dignity despite obvious hardship, and the tiny baby on her back. "Please, let me at least buy you lunch," he offered. Grace hesitated, but hunger and exhaustion won. Kwame drove them to an upscale restaurant, and as they sat down, he gently asked her to share her story. And Grace did. She told him everything, how her husband had accused her of infidelity, how he threw her and their newborn onto the streets, how her own family had turned their backs on her. She spoke through tears, while Emmanuel slept peacefully against her chest, unaware of their desperate situation. Kwame listened without interruption, his expression growing more serious with each revelation. When Grace finished, he was quiet for a moment before speaking. "You saved my life today, Grace. Let me help you rebuild yours. I have a guest house on my property. You and your son can stay there. No conditions, no expectations. Just safety and shelter until you get back on your feet." Grace couldn't believe what she was hearing. "Why would you do this for a stranger?" she asked. Kwame smiled softly. "Because I believe God places people in our paths for a reason." True to his word, Kwame took Grace and Emmanuel to his beautiful estate in East Legon. The guest house was more than Grace had dreamed of: clean, furnished, and safe. Kwame provided everything they needed: clothes, food, baby supplies, and even arranged for a pediatrician to check Emmanuel. For the first time in weeks, Grace slept in a real bed, her baby safe beside her, and she wept tears of gratitude. But Kwame did more than provide shelter. He saw potential in Grace that she had forgotten existed. He offered her a position in his company's design department, recognizing her talent and giving her a chance to use her skills. Grace threw herself into the work, grateful for the opportunity to rebuild her life and prove her worth. She blossomed in the supportive environment, her confidence slowly returning, her spirit healing day by day. 2 years passed, and Grace's transformation was remarkable. Under Kwame's mentorship and support, she had become the creative director of his marketing division, leading successful campaigns that earned industry recognition. She dressed with elegance, spoke with confidence, and carried herself with the quiet strength of someone who had survived fire and emerged refined. Emmanuel grew into a bright, joyful toddler, thriving in a home filled with love and stability. What Grace didn't initially realize was that Kwame's feelings for her had deepened from compassion to genuine love. He admired her resilience, her faith through trials, and her devotion to Emmanuel. One evening, after putting Emmanuel to bed, Kwame asked Grace to join him in the garden. Under the stars, he knelt with a ring and spoke from his heart. "Grace, I know life took so much from you, but if you let me, I want to give you back everything you deserve. Will you marry me? Tears of joy streamed down Grace's face as she said yes. Their wedding was intimate but beautiful, attended by business associates who marveled at Grace's grace and elegance, wondering what kind of woman could capture the heart of Kwame Owusu, one of Ghana's most successful bachelors. Those who knew their story understood that Kwame hadn't fallen for superficial beauty. He had fallen for her unbreakable spirit. Life moved forward peacefully until one sunny afternoon when Grace went to pick up Emmanuel from his preschool. She stepped out of her car, dressed in a tailored suit and designer shoes, when she heard a familiar voice. "Grace!" She turned to see Michael, looking nothing like the confident man she once knew. His clothes were wrinkled, his face showed signs of stress and failure, and his eyes held the weight of regret. Michael stared in disbelief, taking in her transformation. Before he could speak, Emmanuel ran toward Grace, calling "Mommy! Mommy!" and wrapping his arms around her legs. Michael's breath caught as he looked at the boy, seeing his own features reflected back at him unmistakably. "That's your son?" he stammered. "Yes," Grace replied calmly. "His name is Emmanuel." The recognition in Michael's eyes was painful to witness. "He looks exactly like me," he whispered. Grace said nothing, simply took Emmanuel's hand and began walking toward her car. But Michael couldn't let go. Over the following days, consumed by guilt and suspicion, he followed Grace, eventually discovering that she lived in a magnificent estate. When he saw the name on the gate, the Owusu residence, Michael's legs nearly gave out. The billionaire he had been trying to meet for months to save his failing business was Grace's husband. Desperate for answers, Michael returned to the hospital where the original DNA test had been conducted. He demanded to speak with the doctor, explaining his situation. After running new tests, the doctor revealed something extraordinary. Michael had chimerism, a rare condition where he had absorbed his twin in the womb, giving him two sets of DNA. "The first test used your secondary DNA," the doctor explained. "Emmanuel is definitely your biological son." The revelation destroyed Michael. He had thrown away his family based on a medical anomaly he didn't understand. Every cruel word, every accusation, every moment of Emmanuel's life he'd missed, all of it crashed down on him with unbearable weight. He rushed to Grace's mansion, begging the security guards to let him speak with her. When Grace finally agreed to see him, Michael fell to his knees, sobbing and begging for forgiveness. "Grace, I'm so sorry. I was wrong about everything. The test was wrong. Emmanuel is my son. Please forgive me." Grace looked at the broken man before her with calm eyes. "Michael, you threw us out like we meant nothing. You called me terrible names while you were unfaithful throughout our marriage. You let your own child sleep under a bridge while you slept comfortably. I forgave you long ago, not for your sake, but for my peace." Michael begged to see Emmanuel, to have just one chance to be a father. Before Grace could respond, Kwame appeared, his presence commanding respect. "Mr. Michael, I know what you did to my wife and son. Forgiveness doesn't always mean restoration. Sometimes when we lose something precious, God gives it to someone who will treasure it properly. Emmanuel has a father, one who has been there from the beginning when it mattered." Just then, Emmanuel ran out excitedly. "Mommy, Daddy, look at my new toy." Michael's heart shattered as he watched his biological son call another man daddy. He saw the love in Emmanuel's eyes, the security, the happiness. In that moment, Michael understood that being a father required more than DNA. It required presence, sacrifice, and unconditional love, things he had never given. With tears streaming down his face, Michael thanked Kwame for being the father he had failed to be. He apologized once more to Grace and walked away, carrying the heavy burden of his choices. Grace watched him go, feeling a sense of closure. She had learned that trust is the foundation of any relationship, and once broken, the consequences can be permanent. She had also learned that God can turn ashes into beauty, transforming the darkest nights into the brightest dawns. As Grace stood with Kwame's arm around her and Emmanuel playing at their feet, she reflected on her journey. She had survived betrayal, homelessness, and rejection, emerging stronger and more blessed than she could have imagined. Her story became a testament to resilience, faith, and the truth that sometimes the worst endings lead to the most beautiful new beginnings. The end. Thank you for watching this powerful story. If it touched your heart, please like, subscribe, and share with others who need to hear this message. What lessons did you take from Grace's journey? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to hit the notification bell to be notified when we post more inspiring stories. Remember, never make permanent decisions based on temporary emotions, and always value those who stand by you in hard times. God bless you.